to another episode of The Meta. I am your host, Jay Larson, and joining me this week is the one, the only, Brandon Owens. Hello, Brandon.
Hello, Jay. How are you?
I am well. What about you?
I'm also doing well. Tired after going to two conventions back to back, but not regretting it, even though I'm half asleep.
I'm not sure. Well, you're not as old as I am, so I was going to say that this is all a young man's game, but you definitely start to feel your age when you do some of this back-to-back stuff.
Definitely.
So, Brandon, you've been on the podcast several times, but can you go ahead and introduce yourself again for anyone who might be tuning in for the first time?
Sure. I'm Brandon. I live in San Diego. I've been playing War Machine since I think around 2013. I play Cygnar and Crucible Guard, but for the last, basically since Crucible Guard came out, they've been my favorite faction. And after the update in April, definitely the faction I want to be playing. I have gone to WTC a few times. I love traveling to play War Machine. I love meeting new people and making new friends who all are passionate about and enjoy the game. And I'm always happy to talk about the game.
So you recently attended Captain Con and you recently attended the Las Vegas Open. Can you give a little bit of info on those, what it was like attending them, etc.?
Yeah, so Las Vegas Open is in, no surprise, Las Vegas. And that one is close to me, and it's one that I've been to several times. It's close geographically. It's not a long flight. It's very quick from San Diego. It's run by Will, Rutan, and Tyson, and they are an incredible duo for running and judging tournaments. Fantastic guys to hang out with, very organized. They keep the schedules moving on time, really, really knowledgeable and passionate about the game as judges. Always a good event. LVO is one of my favorite events each year, even though I don't really like visiting Vegas in general. I go every year because of LVO, and it's a pretty difficult internal conflict, and going to LVO is almost always, or is always the one that wins out. But I always have a great time there. I get to see so many friends. Sorry, go ahead.
Why do you dislike going to Vegas?
I just don't like dealing with cigarette smoke and all the lights and advertising and noises and the clink, clink, clink. And it's just not my scene.
Just a sensory overload for you?
Pretty much, yeah. And I don't like little things like the hotel rooms in the casino hotels never have a coffee maker because they want you to go downstairs and wait in line for 20 minutes at the stupid Starbucks or whatever kiosk they have. And for me, when I travel, being able to wake up and have my coffee is an important routine that helps me adjust to whatever new place I'm in. And little things like that just drive me crazy. So it's not my favorite place, but I go anyway because LVO is so awesome. So like I said, Will and Tyson run a great event, and it's always well attended. This year, all events obviously haven't been as well attended as they would have in the past for obvious reasons, but still very good attendance. Had a blast. Got to see people I don't see very often, and I got to hang out with my locals at the same time. So I love LVO.
I guess real quick, I guess I'd be interested in hearing this from you as someone who hates Vegas. But what did you think of the venue change with the LVO this time?
Yeah, the Rio was fine. The convention space was sort of laid out in a different way that I felt like we didn't have to share space in ways that we did before, which was nice. But it was also really, really far from the accommodations part of the hotel. So it felt like we had to walk a mile every day to get to the convention space. But yeah, the space itself for the convention was fine. The rooms were kind of old and outdated. It looked like maybe they had done some tiger training in the bedrooms. Like there were just scratches all over the headboards. There were stains on the drapes over the windows. I don't know how you get stains on the drapes, but
and you don't want to know.
No, I didn't ask. So the hotel was fine. I mean, it wasn't the best hotel I've stayed in Vegas, but the convention space is the important part, and I feel like they did a decent job with that.
All right. So go ahead and say a little bit on Captain Con.
Yeah, this is my first time going to Captain Con, and I I was aware of the convention for a few years. It was something that I'd been interested in going to, but most conventions on the East Coast, I had never really tried to go to because they're considerably far from San Diego, and flying east to go to a convention feels a lot more difficult to me than flying west to go to a convention or return from one, whatever. So it had never been feasible with the way that my travel and schedule worked out previously. But this year and last year I went to Boker Ball as well. But with everything being churned up by the pandemic, I said, F it, let's do it. It's 1 week after LVO, but I want to go. Because, I've over the years had time to meet a lot of the guys on the East Coast that play on the East Coast. And I wanted to go to some of their tournaments. So I went. The War Machine stuff was run by Seth Cohen and Zosha Simpson, and they did a fantastic job at running the tournament as well. And they had other people helping them judge. So, thank you to everybody who assisted. But they ran a good show. I had a great time. The team tournament trophy is probably the coolest trophy I've seen for War Machine so far, and I'm a nerd for trophies, so I appreciate that. Also, Tyson makes incredible trophies for War Machine too. So just an overload of cool trophies over the last couple of weeks. Yeah, Captain Con was a great event. I would 100% recommend it to anybody who can have the time and money to be able to get out there and play. Well-run events, lots of great players and people to hang out with. Not as much to do outside of the hotel as there is in Vegas, but still definitely a good one to attend.
Yeah, it is interesting. Like the concept of going to New England in February is not super appealing, but
Understand.
You probably don't want to be outside the convention much anyway. So
no, and I arrived on a Thursday night, and then Friday was actually fine. It was like 50 degrees outside, which is pretty warm there in February. But Saturday, the roads were icy. It was less than 30 degrees. Nobody wanted to go anywhere because they were just afraid to drive. So it's like, I guess we live inside the hotel for the next 48 hours, which we were going to do anyway. Let's not lie. There wasn't much to go outside of the hotel.
Yeah. All right. Well, just a review of what we're going to be doing. We'll chat with each other for 45 or 50 minutes in this first episode that will be available to everyone. And then we'll have a bonus episode for the patron supporters. And a lot of the questions that we go over will be questions from patrons of the show. So first off, we start with the important, hard-hitting questions. Bennett says, Brandon, are you an ass trooper or a failed experiment?
Oh, God. Bennett always asks the best questions that I don't know how to answer. I think I would be an ass trooper because I love their armor and their concept and what they do. And I'd rather be inside all that armor than a mutated ogre wearing a loincloth and carrying some weapon that I picked up on the way out of the science factory, whatever it is that they make them in. So I think I'd be an ass trooper.
All right. So next set of questions come from Jacob. First off, he says, Brandon, awesome work at the Las Vegas Open, Crucible Guard Hall of Fame. He says, first off, does the Chris Davies Karchev 2 Stalingrad pairing at all worry you given his success at CanCon?
First, thank you, Jacob, for the congratulations. I appreciate it. In terms of that particular Khador pairing, not at all concerned about the Stalingrad list. That's something that both Lucas and Gearhart play into well. So that's not a concern. Obviously, Karchev 2 is a new hotness for good reason. And while I have concerns about Karchev 2 generally, I have played a number of games into it. The Khador Karchev 2 is something that I'm fairly comfortable playing Lucas into. I don't know if I'm willing to say it's an advantage matchup for Lucas, but it's one that I can win with some consistency with Lucas. So the pairing doesn't force me into tough choices about which list I want to play. So I'm able to play the list for either Karchev or Rus 2 that I want to play anyway. And it's just a question of whether I can outplay my opponent who's playing that list or not. So it doesn't worry me any more than Karchev 2 worries me generally, regardless of what faction I'd be playing in the game right now.
Sure. So you would probably put it in in the category of a top tier list that that you have to be prepared for, but not necessarily disadvantaged. Would you say that's correct?
For card shape too?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Whether or not I'm disadvantaged, advantaged, or it's neutral, I would need more games to really want to hear a conclusion like that. But it's somewhere between like 40-60 or 60-40, one way or the other is what I would say. And it's definitely a top tier list that everyone is going to need to be prepared for. And some factions are going to have an easier or more difficult time being prepared for it.
All right. So next question from Jacob. He says, how do you see your Crucible Guard pairing off against two vastly different list builds, such as in Khador? Did you see them at Las Vegas Open already? And if not, how would you prepare / tech for them in the future?
It sounds like the question is, how do I feel playing my pairing into a Khador pair that has two different lists?
I think it's kind of a question of how do you pair off or prepare for two lists that are kind of like two skews in different directions.
Yeah, so like the infantry skew and then a warjack armor skew. I start with list building. I want my list to be able to handle more than one paradigm, and that's inherent in the way that I've built Lucas, and it's also inherent in the way that I've built Gearheart. The Lucas list in particular I mentioned is what I'd prefer to play into card chip 2 based on the games that I've played so far. And I haven't really made any sacrifices that make it weaker into infantry. So I still have the two Rayless Interceptors, which are really good into basically all infantry that's not immune to cold. Scathers are also incredibly good into single wound infantry. Something like Stalingrad isn't so concerned with Scathers because they primarily want to shoot, but something like Doom Reavers is going to have a really hard time with Scathers because they're going to zone Doom Reavers out from getting to targets that they really need to charge. I have the Thamrite Archon in there still, which does amazing work against infantry, can also leave down Eruption of Ash Clouds that can zone single wound infantry from getting where they want. Something like Vlad 2 can put down a Wind Blast to remove them, but you get the idea. And I have Rocket Person Stinger in there that's really, really good against single wound infantry. So basically the list is built as a toolbox that has all the tools, and you can use more than one tool against more than one paradigm each turn if you need to. But bottom line, if you build your list correctly, it should be able to handle war skew if it's going to be a good list.
I guess to step back a little bit, can you maybe go over what your lists are currently looking like? Maybe start with what you were sort of came up with after the update, and then how things evolved from that point.
Absolutely. So pre-update, I was playing Gearheart, Ass Mountain, which I'll go into in a second, and a Lucas list with two Interceptors. The Lucas list changed the most, so I'll talk about that first. Before the update, I was playing Lucas with two Rayless Interceptors, two Death Archons, Prospero with a Suppressor, and then in my battle group I had a Liberator and I believe two Vindicators. And I had some Mechanics and a Mentalist, I think. And it was a very strong list, and it played in a particular way most of the time because of the Death Archons, but it had very strong shooting and also respectable melee. And then obviously all of the control and nonsense that you get from a caster like Lucas. When the update occurred, Death Archons changed quite a bit, but we're still very strong. The biggest thing is that Lucas lost, I think, 3 Warjack points, and the cost of Death Archons went up by 2 points. So I was going to have to change the list. I didn't have the option to keep it the same. And there was no real way that I was going to be able to keep the core of the list the same because it was already so tight on points. So I had to drop something that I had doubles of, either an Interceptor or Death Archon or a Vindicator. And I went through building multiple different things, trying to find a way that felt good to make it work. And ultimately, I decided that I should probably just step away from that paradigm and try a different Lucas build for a while. And if I wanted to go back, my Death Archons would still be there on the shelf. So I went to Magnum Opus and put in a Thamrite Archon because the change from D3 Rate of Fire to Rate of Fire 3 on them is just kind of insane. And I'm pretty comfortable saying they're the best Archon in the game right now because of that change and because of the way that the meta is. And with a caster like Lucas, who can hit things with up to a -4 debuff and has telekinesis, they can do incredible amounts of work because they're independently accurate and they have so much technology built in that they fit right in with the I have a tool for everything theme that is really important to me in my Lucas list. So I started with 2 trains, 1 Thamrite Archon. Obviously, take a Liberator with him. I kept Prospero with the Suppressor because that's a really good package, and Suppressors just got better. And I put in, they got better in the April update, not the most recent one, but I kept that package because it's really good. I put in a Retaliator instead of the second Vindicator because Retaliators got cheaper. They got slightly improved while losing 2 power in their gun. And I really like having the availability of the tech that they bring as well. So that was sort of an easy choice for me to make in this list. And I put in some Rocket Person solos because aces are really good and they're even better in an Archon meta. And I can't remember if they dropped to 3 points in this update or not, but I think this is the one where they did. And I put in a Stinger because Stingers are also amazing. I tried some other lists before I settled on this one, but this one feels, for the last couple of months or a few months that I've been playing it, like the list. It's really strong. And I'm sorry, I've also got 1 Mentalist and 1 Mechanic in there. My other list, Ass Mountain, before the most recent update, for the battle group, I had a Vindicator and a Suppressor. And I had 2 Death Archons in the list. Again, Death Archons changed. They got 2 points more expensive. And Gearhart also gained some battle group points for some reason. So I could have just added a Retaliator to his battle group and dropped some other points, but I decided to go with the Vulcan because of the way that the meta was shifting and some things that I wanted the list to do better. For instance, to play better in the mirror match, I wanted to put a Vulcan in there. And instead of the 2 Death Archons, I went with 2 Stingers initially, but ultimately I dropped those 2 Stingers and put in, surprise, a Thamrite Archon because it's just really good. And I went to Magnum Opus. So now my Gearhart list is 2 units of failed experiments, 3 minimum units of assault troopers for a couple of reasons, 2 DBRs and a Vulcan. I put in the DBRs because I took out the Vindicator, and I think they're really good with Gearhart. They're only 4 points now. Thamrite Archon, 2 Mentalists, and 1 Mechanic. And Alice is in all my Crucible Guard lists. I may not mention her. It's because she's attached and just incorporated into whatever caster I'm playing. You never don't take Alice. But I changed to the minimum unit of assault troopers because you gain 2 points in exchange for 1 assault trooper, and you have 3 separate activations, so it gives you a little more versatility in terms of order of operations. You have 3 separate command bubbles, and you have 3 separate units to make your list slightly less susceptible to controlled spells like Rebuke or Crippling Grasp, etc. So it also feels like a really good iteration of the list right now. I have a hard time thinking of what to change with that.
All right. Well, let's get back to the questions then, now that we have a little bit of an update on what you've been playing. Jacob asks, do you think Crucible Guard has more or less depth in competitive list creation compared to some of the recent lists that we've been seeing coming out from other factions?
I feel like it has a lot, that it has a lot of depth. And I know it seems like we're seeing Lucas and Ass Mountain everywhere. And I do think that is the strongest pair right now that you can play in Crucible Guard, but it is not the only very strong pair that you can play in Crucible Guard. You have a very strong caster in Bennett that you can do multiple builds in. You can do multiple strong builds with Silvestro, and you can do multiple strong builds with Locke. You can do multiple strong builds with McKay. You can basically pick 2 Warcasters in Crucible Guard and build them a number of different ways and have a competitive pair. And I think that's an incredible strength and really an incredible job balancing the faction as a miniature faction, limited faction, that you can do that. And I don't feel that way about most normal factions or most full factions, that you have 5 different Warcasters that you can pick to build a strong pair and go to a tournament and feel confident that you're not really handicapping yourself.
Next question from Jacob. He says, do you think the recent Grand update, War Machines and Hordes, has worked itself closer to running a competitive non-themed force or further away from that possibility?
You will not be playing a non-themed force competitively in War Machine. we're no closer now than we have been before. It's not going to happen.
Great. Do you think that there's some War Machine or Hordes factions where that is a possibility, or is it just that dream is dead for everyone?
I haven't gone through and looked at every faction to try to see could I build a non-theme force here that's better or not better, but that is competitive enough that it's worth playing. And I think the reason but in spite of the fact I haven't done a faction by faction analysis, I don't think that is possible in any faction, because if it is, that faction's in a really bad place. All of the balancing updates they've been doing, one of the goals is to make factions compelling and competitive. And in order to do that under the theme-based system, you need to have theme forces that give you enough flexibility and options and power level that they're worth playing. And with a lot of the new mod releases that we've had as well, they've been released tied into specific themes. So I just have a really hard time thinking of a faction that's going to have options you can play out of theme that are stronger than any of the in-theme options that you have. It's certainly not the case in Crucible Guard. It's not the case in Cygnar. I have a hard time thinking of a faction where that would be the case.
All right. So next set of questions are from Tokenator. His first question is it Crucible Guard Christmas?
God, the only factions I recall hearing associated with Christmas is Circle, that it's Circle Christmas perpetually, forever, for years. But you know what? Right
and
now,
once upon a time, it was Christmas, but that was a different time.
Long dark age of Mark II. It very well could be Crucible Guard Christmas right now. I think the faction is in a very good place competitively, despite not gaining much in terms of raw point cost reductions or massive changes to models like many other factions did in the most recent update. I think the changes they did get were helpful, and the faction was already in an excellent place. And where they are right now feels like a flexible, top-tier competitive faction that's incredibly enjoyable to play, and doesn't really have any huge blind spots in terms of other factions or list paradigms. And that, for me personally as a player, is exactly where I want to be putting my time and energy and enjoyment. And I think Crucible Guard is very compelling in that regard, and you can win events with them if you pilot them well.
All right, so next question from Benup. He says, do you think there is anything egregious in Crucible Guard?
I'm probably going to have unpopular opinions in this regard. I know there are people who do think there are egregious models. I don't. I don't think anything is broken or significantly overtuned in the faction, and I could talk about why for each model. I know the things people will point to are going to be the Vindicator, the Rayless Interceptor, the Liberator, and depending on how you identify the faction, the Thamurite Archon. The Vindicator I'll start with just real quick. Obviously got so much better. I don't think it's broken because it's not a spammable jack. And my list builds, the most I'll put in any list is 3, and that's very uncommon. I'll do that in my Bennett list for a variety of reasons. That's basically it. But for the most part, I find myself taking 1, maybe 2. And it's a 15-point heavy whose gun you want to use each turn. It feels like one of the best heavies in the game. It doesn't feel broken, like completely out of line with what a Warjack is supposed to be for points. It doesn't feel like it's warping the meta. It's just a really good staple piece in the faction. Another argument that it's not broken is in my Gearheart list, I'm not taking 1 and I don't miss it. I have a Vulcan and 2 DBRs instead. So again, I think it's very, very strong, but I don't feel like it's egregious. The Rayless Interceptor, the thing people will complain about is that it didn't need to get power tokens. I understand why I think the developers thought it needed a buff. I know why I thought the faction needed some buffs and why power tokens, the Interceptor, helped address that. And it was namely that with the way that the game had been evolving in terms of the meta, there were models that you needed to kill in almost every game you played that Rayless Interceptors could not reliably kill with their offensive stat profile without any way to boost. And obviously I'm talking about Archons and then also about all the Riot Quest solos that came out. And while Rayless Interceptors are really good, they would reach a point where in games there weren't a lot of troops that they were good at killing, and there were a lot of solos that they were not good at killing, and they could become a liability in that regard. And the faction also struggled in other areas to deal with those things like Archons. We didn't have a lot of debuffs that worked on them besides like Ice Cage. You have to remember Lucas wasn't a thing originally, so you didn't have Disintegration and TK, etc. So I think the change was reasonable, and I don't think it takes them over the top. They get 1 per turn. They're a very strong model, but I play games where interceptors die. I play games where interceptors do a reasonable amount of work but don't destroy the world. And in order to get the most value out of them, you have to actually play them quite well. So I think they are fine. Again, they're a very strong battle engine. I don't think they're egregious. And then the Liberator, whatever, it's a 10-point arc node. And yeah, I can channel while engaged, but it's a 10-point arc node. You got to be able to get the value from it. And lastly, the Thamrite Archon, I don't know, it might be broken. We'll see. I don't think it's broken in Crucible Guard, though. I think it's broken in factions where you can take 2 and give it friendly faction support, looking at you, Ashland, too.
So I am curious. I mean, it's fairly common. People are come on the podcast and they're asking, like, which of these things in your faction are broken? The guest will be like, oh no, my faction's fine, which is fine. I mean, that's I mean, in fairness, a lot of times I think they are fine, and people just get a little bit too worked up over stuff sometimes. But I guess I am a little bit curious, since the dynamic update, what stuff out of faction do you think might actually end up needed to have been relooked at, or isn't okay where they're currently at?
I think Thamrite Archons, like I said, are a concern in some contexts, just the way that Death Archons were a concern in some contexts. And to be clear, if I was talking to you before the update and I was asked that same question, I would say Death Archons are broken, because they were.
Right, yeah.
I'm not convinced that Thamrite Archons are at that same level where Death Archons were. I don't think that's the case. And it's largely because power level is one thing, but the way that a model interacts with the game is a different thing. And that's typically where I'm going to be looking at a model and evaluating whether I think it's broken. And the Death Archon checked all those boxes. A Thamrite Archon doesn't quite. But in terms of models post-update that I think may be overtuned and need to be looked at more, I think Kharchev 2 is on that list. And it's, again, not necessarily because of power level, but it's how he interacts with other models in the game. It's about the level of effort required to play him vis-a-vis the level of power and devastation that model and the army that it runs can enact on a table. So I think if anything's going to need a second look, it might be Kharchev 2, but we'll see how that bears out. Other than that, I don't think there are any huge outliers that I've noticed.
I guess two that I'm curious of your opinion on specifically is, first is kind of the update that Circle had to the GOAT chassis of Warbeast. Do you think that those are going to end up being okay?
Yes, I do. The GOAT's got a lot better. Surprisingly, I haven't been seeing them. I mean, almost at all. And I think that's basically because so many other models, Living Beast specifically in Circle, got so good as well. So it's one of those things where we're going to need more time to see. I imagine people have been too busy testing Warp Wolves and playing Warp Wolves, playing Una 2 with Griffins, and playing Kayas with Warp Wolves and some goats. But I don't see anything besides them getting stronger and cheaper. And they needed that. And whether or not they got too strong or too cheap, I don't think so, because we would have already been seeing people spam them. And I haven't seen that at all. So I could be wrong, but right now I'm basing this off of a lack of observation of them having an impact in Circle list building and play.
The other one I wanted to ask about was is Kruger 2. He's been a popular caster, it feels like, for ages at this point. Do you think that he's just a really good caster, or do you think that he's someone that's potentially overtuned as well?
That's a complicated question because there are a lot of layers involved. he's obviously a really good caster. Is he too good a caster? In a vacuum, I think the answer is no. But if anything is too good, I think it's Kruger 2 in Secret Masters. It's not so much at this point the availability of really good models you can take with him, although that's part of it. It's also just the sack pawn interaction. One of the classic ways that you could deal with Kruger 2 is by threatening assassination and forcing him to play more conservatively personally. But the absolutely ridiculous board position or board states you can have with Kruger at the front of his army on zero camp sometimes within everything but melee range of your opponent's army and know that he's not going to die, that can be a problem. That said, I think the change to Windstorm helped a lot to make that a little less abusive feeling. But if he is broken, it's only because of Secret Masters, I feel. But I don't know if I'm willing to say he's broken. He's close, but I don't think he's broken right now. Pre-update, I'd say maybe.
Okay. All right. Well, back to the questions from Bennett. He says, how many trains should one person buy?
2 trains, if you're talking about Rayless Interceptors and not Mackay or the Vulcan. If you want to play Mackay, buy Mackay. If you want to play a Vulcan, buy a Vulcan. But if you're asking how many Rayless Interceptors should a person buy, you should buy 2.
How big of a part of the faction identity would you say the Vulcan is at this point in time?
I think it's a significant part. It's not an essential part, but it's significant. What you're asking yourself when you are considering a Vulcan is, A, do I need its technology? And B, do I need its output in a given list build? I think you need its output a lot less than you did before April of last year. And that's mainly because Vindicators and Suppressors got so much better at doing their job. I mean, before that update, you wouldn't see Vindicators on the table. Vindicators are your staple range output in addition to Rayless Interceptors at this point in the game. Also, obviously, pre that April update, you couldn't boost with Interceptors, so they weren't a turn over turn skirmishing platform where you're going to remove a heavy at range unless you put significant other resources into it to debuff it. But now with Vindicators and Interceptors, you can put out a number of high power boosted shots from long range per turn. And that really addresses the ranged output question. So you don't need a Vulcan for its range output. You sometimes want it for its technology. And specifically, that's if you want the no healing for living models. Sometimes that's incredibly useful. And it's one of the primary reasons I put it in my Gearheart list. You can take a Retaliator for very cheap now that can apply grievous wounds, but it doesn't work on huge base models, and it doesn't work. It's not as widely applicable or easy to apply as it is with the Vulcan. The long range rust is a good reason to take the Vulcan. Sometimes you're going to want a list where you can apply rust from 14 or more inches away and shoot models or deal with models, which you can't do with the suppressor without committing the suppressor. And sometimes there'll be reasons why you can't get it within 8 inches of what you want to attack. So the Vulcan's good if you want the ability to do that. And then there's the niche, but surprisingly often lately, technology that I use, which is Unnatural Affliction, where you can remove immunities. I find myself using that a lot against mercs or in the mirror match when I want to shoot assault troopers or something else that's immune. It's actually come up way more than I ever thought it would over the last few months of playing the game. So if you want that tech, the Vulcan is there for you. And it fits into the faction theme and identity really well because it's this big robot that can apply these very potent, powerful tools that are situational. And it's a tool that I consider and reach for maybe 10% of the time in list building. And right now it happens to be in my pair in one of my lists, and it's comfortable there. I could also take it out. I'm happier with it there right now. So again, I think it's non-essential, but I think you want to have one because there are going to be times where something that you're dealing with, either in your local meta or in the tournament scene, is going to be easier to deal with if you have a Vulcan, and you're going to reach for it then.
Next question from Ben Up. He says, how valuable have the rocket person stingers been in your games?
Oh God, I love stingers. I absolutely love stingers. When their rules came out of CID, I said, these models are fantastic. I'm looking forward to playing them. I know a lot of people were down on them. I don't know why. Now having been able to play with them for the better part of a year at this point, they're definitely fantastic models. I didn't get to play with them much after the April update because I was in Prima Materia, because Death Archons are broken. And I probably mentioned at some point that I was sad that Death Archons were so broken because I really wanted to play the Rocket Person solos. After the second update later last year before Warfare Weekend, I've been playing a Stinger in my Lucas list basically nonstop. I've been playing 2 Stingers in some lists, but I think having 1 Stinger is an excellent choice in any list that you build, especially with somebody like Lucas. They can do so many useful things. They can shadow bind and or blind battle engines. They can shadow bind Archons. If somebody jams you with single wound models, they can walk into their back arc and hit them at mat 9 and auto damage, or shadow bind them or blind them to make it easier for you to deal with. They have some crazy tech that works on the Crucible Guard as well. For instance, I played a game at Captain Con where my opponent shoved a bunch of infantry in my face under Kozlov feet, and some of that infantry was a unit of Legion of Lost Souls. So they had shield wall up, they were under Kozlov's feet, so they're armed 20, and there was like a cluster of 4 in my zone. And I walked up my Stinger 7 inches into the back arc of the one all the way in the back of that cluster. I poked it at mat 9, needing that ones to hit. I auto damaged it, and with volatile expansion, it blew up into an AoE 14 in the back arc of the 3 dudes in front. So I hit them at dice off 2, killed them on anything but 1s. Then I sidestepped 2 inches into another cluster and poked another dude in the back and killed him, and he blew up on some of his buddies. And they do really cool, fun stuff like that that's incredibly effective. Stingers are awesome, and I would definitely take a Stinger if you can.
All right, so next question from Benup. He says, how many times have you actually triggered Battle Wizard with an Ascendant Mentalist?
Quite a few times, actually. I look for that opportunity when I can. What I'm typically asking myself is, do I really, really, really need whatever spell they're going to cast? If so, and I can't leave it up to chance, and I'll just walk up and cast that spell. If I really want it, but I won't lose the game if I don't have it, and I see an opportunity to kill something with reliability and take it, then I'll go for it, because obviously then you get extra value. Sometimes it's a threat extension thing where you really want to get that spray onto some models, but you need that extra 3 inches, and you see the opportunity to charge something and kill it and get that spray that's going to be a coup for you in that game. You do it then. And then sometimes there's just a guaranteed, like there's a model that's knocked down, and if I hit it, I auto kill it. Like I'm going to charge that model and then Battle Wizard, because why wouldn't I? So in terms of frequency, I'd say I probably Battle Wizard in like somewhere between 1% and 5% of Ascendant Mentalist activations and games that I play, closer to the 1%, I think, which is not a lot, but it's a non-zero number that I do on a regular basis if you, look at the aggregate, I guess.
All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and pause there and continue the conversation in our next episode. Want to thank the patrons for supporting the show, for submitting questions, and for just being awesome people in general. As always, check out Discount Games Inc. to get your gaming needs with a smile from the happy shippers at our business. And lastly, Brandon, I wanted to thank you very much for carving some time out of your schedule when you could have been catching up on sleep instead.
My pleasure, Jay. Thanks for having me on.
You betcha.